Hi, it's Justin from Spalted Stag Studio. In this video, I'm going to be making a wooden mallet. I'm starting with some 6-quarter mahogany. I'm not really sure what species of mahogany this is. I've never really worked with something this dense and heavy before. Now that sounds great for a mallet, but that's not necessarily true. So with the heavier and harder wood, you risk damaging your projects that are made with softer woods, which in this case is probably most woods I use. And that's fine because most of the time I don't need something this big. This was just for fun, and I just used some scrap what I had laying around. I'm marking the center point where the handle is going to be, and that's about 2 inches. It's going to have to be a significantly larger handle than I would normally put in something that was useful. And if you notice here, there's a space behind the wood against the fence, and that's just to create a slight angle, and you'll see why further in the video. The piece and do the same thing over. So now I'm going to be left with 2 pieces that have one square edge and another one with a slight angle. In the assembly process, I'm going to make sure that the square edges of the walnut are facing the outside of the mahogany, and they need to be a mirror image of each other. This is going to create a space that is wider at one end and narrow at the other. I'm going to use a couple cauls to make sure everything's aligned properly, and then tack it down with a couple brad nails. Now the brad nails aren't going to offer it any strength, this is just to make sure everything's aligned properly. Once I get the 2 pieces of walnut glued to the first piece of mahogany, I'm going to go ahead and glue together the top. Again, I'm going to use cauls to make sure everything's aligned properly, and also a couple clamps. Once I'm sure everything's aligned properly, I'll go ahead and apply a couple clamps. Now there's really not much room here, so once I'm sure that nothing's going to move, I'll go ahead and take off all the clamps for the alignment so I have more room. I tend to go overkill on clamps. And in this case, I just really want to make sure that everything's tight. After all, it is a mallet, it's going to get beat up, and I want all the glue surface that I can get. After scraping the glue off with a scraper, I'm going to go ahead and use a jack plane and make sure everything's perfectly flat. Here I'm marking the handle flush, but I'm actually going to cut a little past that line. That way I have a little room for air and it sticks out a little bit and can be flushed up perfectly with the hammer head. There's going to be an 1/8 inch shoulder, so I'm going to set the blade a little below an 1/8 inch. And then make the test cuts and slowly raise the blade until it fits perfectly. After a couple test cuts, I go ahead and start chipping away wood. Again, this is probably a process better suited for a dado blade, but I like making things hard on myself. I'm going to save you the pain of watching me do this 879 times and go ahead and skip ahead. So off camera I am testing these fits, and I'm just going to use a shoulder plane and get everything to fit perfectly. During glue up I tried to make sure there wasn't too much glue on the inside portion of this, but I still had some squeeze out, so I'm just using a nice sharp chisel to clean that out. Since I'll be using a wedge to secure this in place, I'm going to drill a hole in the center. And this is going to create some space for the wood to open up, and it'll also help stop the wood from splitting. After rough drawing the handle, I'm going to use the bandsaw and get as close as I can, and then clean it up on the sander. I don't have footage of me doing that on the sander. I was getting a lot of dust everywhere, and my lens isn't really rated for that much dust. I'm cutting a scrap piece of walnut down to the same width as the handle, and then I'm going to put it on the Wedge Maker 3000 and go ahead and cut a wedge. I'm cleaning up the edges on the mallet head now, and I am doing this at about a 5-degree angle, and that's just going to make a more comfortable striking surface. The final glue up is pretty easy and straightforward. Now, I did kind of make a little bit of a mistake with making the wedge a little too long. It worked, but it was very, very close. It should have been much shorter. Using a 3/8 round over bit, I'm going to give it a nice profile. For the finish, I'm going to apply tung oil. This is probably one of my favorite finishes. I'm using 600 grit sandpaper and really working the oil into the wood. I went a little heavy on it, but it's fine. You really want the wood to take in as much as it can. I should really stop raw dogging my finishing oils because my hands end up smelling like the oil for the whole day. Using the sandpaper really helps work the oil into the wood, and it also gives it a nice smooth finish. You really don't want to sand it to too high of a grip prior to the oil. It'll end up getting clogged with sawdust and you won't get quite the same look. So once you get your mind out of the gutter, I'm drying off all the excess oil. Once the wood accepts what it's going to accept, you need to dry off as much as possible. You don't want any residual oil on your workpiece. And the instructions say 24 hours to dry. I like to wait a couple days and then repeat this entire process. And there you have it, an excessively large wooden mallet. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.